Nos ponemos a metro y medio, ¿eh?
Tenemos mucho tiempo, ¿eh? Ah, que no te quieres quitar la mascarilla.
No, pero si lo digo porque normalmente...
Si quieres, yo me voy más
por
para
eso,
allá.
si es que si se ve en una foto en un vídeo, pues normalmente tengo muchos problemas y todo. Pero no pasa nada.
Solo con los...
Vale, sí,
vale.
Sí.
Bueno, yo me lo quito ahora, ¿vale?
Sí, tranquila.
Bueno, yo creo que enlaza muy bien esta mesa con la intervención anterior.
I think this round table can tie off nicely with the previous one. The measures that are currently being adopted in the cities that my colleagues here represent fit perfectly with everything we've just talked about. Maya Sanchez is a councilwoman for environmental issues for the Valladolid municipality, where for years now they've been working towards restricting car access and improving quality of life in the town center. My colleague will also be sharing with us his experience in terms of traffic reduction. We also have Anabel Guias from Pontevedra, and she'll be telling us about their experience in Pontevedra, where they've been very, very brave, I have to say, in the past few years. People often talk about the Pontevedra model as one to look up to, as it put pedestrians at the center of it all. And then we have Cesar Gallardo from Seville. He will be filling us in on two experiences, one in the center of Seville with an LEZ, and then another one about the La Cartuja island with its pedestrian area. Let's kick it off. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to take part in this roundtable. It's been very interesting so far. Yesterday, there was an important event in our cities, and we saw celebrities talk to one another with their masks off, and it was quite strange to see that. It looked like a different reality, really. And I think it's a similar feeling to the one we get when we look at Plaza Mayor or Calle Santiago, completely free of cars. Those of you who are from Valladolid know this for sure. There are a number of streets in our cities that would be difficult to picture differently to what they look like right now. What is our vision for our cities? I think right now what we see in our cities are traffic jams, people struggling to adapt to change. And this happens when we think on the short term. Thinking long term, on the other hand, we know that it will be perhaps a little difficult to adapt, but we've done it before, and it's always yielded positive results. If we cast our gaze further ahead in the future, we will enable an urban transformation, perhaps not in 2021, 22, or 23, after 2030, but we will achieve it. I don't think we should be discussing whether it's good or bad for pedestrians or motorists to pedestrianize areas within our cities. That's not the issue, I don't think. The real issue is that we are heavily reliant on private vehicles within our cities, and they're bad for our health as well. We need to appeal to every person's individual sense of responsibility, because with traffic reductions come a number of positive aspects. We need to make it difficult to pollute our cities. If there are parking spaces available every other block, we won't be sending the right message. Those of you who are from Valladolid, or those of you who have visited this city, know how important it is for buses, for example, public transport, to circulate freely and faster through our cities. You know how important it is to have safe pedestrian crossing around schools, for example, and we can achieve all of this. Who need to drive on a daily basis. We can't forget that, but the vast majority of the population doesn't really. And if we provide convenient alternatives to that, we will make it easier for people to quit using their private vehicles, their cars, and that's what we've been working towards at the Valladolid municipality back in 2015. When we took office, we immediately published pollution statistics online and on a free app, because in our opinion, the most important thing is to educate our citizens. Debates can be misleading. I remember when Central Madrid was instated, some people said, where is pollution? I can't see it. And that clearly means that a better education is necessary. In 2017, in Valladolid, we approved our anti-pollution program. Our figures showed that on average 35,000 people would die in Spain every year due to pollution. And so, thanks to state subsidies, and I'd like to thank the ministry for that, we activated our plan. It was a 4-year plan which led 67 initiatives, and on 14 occasions led to the total closure of traffic due to the high levels of pollution within the city limits. During the pandemic, our readings were a little different, but the pandemic was useful as a sort of urban laboratory, a sort of workshop that we could use to experiment with alternative solutions, precisely because people weren't allowed to leave their homes. They didn't need to drive anywhere, and readings were very, very different. We do know that without traffic, our health improves. So let's act on that. In August 2019, we activated our plan yet one more time with great results. Our air quality, of course, is still not optimal, but there has been a decrease in deaths thanks to that. Anytime we've needed to impose a traffic closure within the town center, we called meetings with business associations to explain to them why we were doing that. And it was difficult, let me tell you, because there was a lot of work to be done. Our technicians, our experts need to explain what our graphs were all about, and often people didn't seem to believe our statistics, but we achieved it in the end. And now our readings are much better compared to 2015. So this emergency plan was useful, but it wasn't enough. And that's because it's a last resort. It's the last straw. Acting when the damage has already been done is necessary, but is not enough. We need preventative measures. When we have to close down traffic because of pollution, well, that clearly shows that we all need to take on different habits, pick up different habits as citizens. And how do we achieve that? We need a structural change, a change in our mobility habits, but our air quality plan also disseminates information about the importance of renewable energy. Along with the government, we have been working towards laying down a different plan, a more extensive one, because we need a cultural change. That's inevitable. In Madrid, we've seen, for example, how depending on who's in office, these changes are implemented to different extents. And this in turn leads to distrust from our citizens. We do have the necessary regulation. In these days, we've been talking about the Spanish law on the environment, but there are also several European laws that have been breaking ground in this regard. And this is great. But another thing we have to do is promote the use of public transport. LEZs are great, but if at the same time we don't make it possible for people to use public transport, that's not enough in and of itself. And we've already taken a few steps in Valladolid. Bus tickets, for example, are free for people under 15. This measure has been questioned repeatedly. But at the same time, it has a number of positive effects because children get used to using public transport. Also, we are overhauling current regulation. We want to create more shared public spaces. The speed limit, 30 kilometers an hour within the town center, has been reinforced. We have reinforced our bus public transport lane network across the city. And we're very proud of all of that. It's important, we think, to promote a global vision of these policies, and we're doing that. Our municipal fleet, for example, when fleets are old, it's difficult to promote the use of public transport. And as a result, we've been doing our best to electrify it, to go fully electric within our public transport system. Next slide, please.
Gracias. El plan pretende ser una guía de acción, pero también se ha hecho un esfuerzo importante.
This plan is an action guide.
Y sus efectos para la salud, con un apartado específico para el ozono, consideramos que es importante.
And it comprises a specific segment on health, for example, on ozone. Ozone is a secondary component, but we do know that it has a huge effect on our citizens' health, and we need more restrictive measures. On top of that, we have a program of diagnostics set up by the University of Valladolid, along with a number of measures that aim to improve air quality with the overall goal of complying with the goals set by the WHO, which have become more demanding as of 1 week ago. So this is a new challenge that cities have. We can't turn a blind eye to that. So public administrations are responsible for conducting a technical overhaul of their individual situations. This is what we need to do. It's a reality. Figures from the WHO and new limits that have been approved are difficult to comply with, not only for Valladolid, but also for Madrid and Barcelona, which are much, much larger. So what kind of measures do we have? Mobility, education, training, participation, residential and industrial use. We've also been coordinating with the Castilla-León Autonomous Community with a view to reducing emission across the whole region of Valladolid and beyond. Our goals, as you know, are air quality, educating, minimizing impacts on pollution, etc., etc. These are the measures, and as you know, this is also about LEZs, which are regulated by the Spanish law on climate change. And as my colleagues said earlier, a lot of work has been done in Madrid, Barcelona, Seville, and Bilbao. What's the advantage of LEZs? In my opinion, one advantage they have is that they provide a better, more enjoyable open space for people, and at the same time they act positively against pollution. This has a positive impact on the health of citizens and visitors of Valladolid. We encourage people to conduct activities, to carry out activities in the town center as well. Electric cars, I would like to say, surely they're great, but they're still cars, and we have more statistics on that on the Ecologistas en Acción page, and the use should also be reduced wherever possible. When we did all of our projections, we decided to introduce our LEZ in the very center of our town because it was an area, a part of town that we were very familiar with and that we'd worked on with our emergency plan. We want to encourage participation from our citizens, and so we also launched a number of educational initiatives for the benefit of our population. We collaborated with several trade unions and associations, and we're currently carrying out a very extensive overhaul of the situation. So this is the shape of our soon-to-be implemented LEZ, but we're still working on it. Regarding exemptions, that's something we have to look into. We can't make the same mistakes that were made in Madrid. All exemptions need to be approved at a municipal level. Starting on January the 1st, 2022, we'll be banning unlabeled vehicles to enter the town center. This is our plan. We can't really issue fines until all the regulation has been set up properly. but we're working on that. A whole financial study needs to be done. We're doing it, but it's not very easy. We need to gather more data regarding how businesses will be effective, etc. But we do know that thanks to this project, we'll be complying with the guidelines of the ministry, and we've actually asked the ministry to give us better instructions, which I'm sure they will, regarding unlabeled vehicles. About 30% of total cars in Valladolid, 27,500 vehicles altogether, are unlabeled. So the first step will be taken in that direction, banning these vehicles from entering the town center. Later on, we'll be issuing fines as well. By January 2025, we initially wanted to ban traffic altogether from the town center, but it's currently being debated within public administrations. This is the scope of our project. I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you that we've presented this project for financing, for European financing, so we may be receiving funds from the European Union. This is the right time to be ambitious. We have guidelines from the WHO, guidelines from the Spanish state, and in Valladolid we're more than ready to comply with new regulations. As Carlos Bravo from Zaragoza said yesterday, a few cities aren't ready. However, it's paramount that we make a collective effort to better protect the health of our citizens, and to that end, it's very important to comply with these guidelines. The measures we've adopted so far have already had an impact on Valladolid. It's noticeable. We have 25,000 more square meters of worth of pedestrian areas, and that's absolutely great. People can now walk down Paseo Isabel la Católica, and it's beautiful. Air quality has improved. It's at a record 97% now in the town center, and this shows that people know what is required of them. Traffic has gone down by 30% in the town center as well.
I think that when we talk in these debates, the first thing that we have to do is to, as public administration, is to not take a step backwards and to be very firm in what we're doing, and to be convincing and to ensure that the measures will really be inevitable. That means that even though there are changes in the city government from one political persuasion to another, the measures continue. I think that's what we should be looking towards. Thank you. Thank you, Maria. We now invite Jaime Caballero, Mobility Councillor from Logroño Town Council, to come to speak to us.
¿Es este? ¿Ah? ¿Cuál es?
A ver, baja. Esto. Eso es. Esta. Sí, dale a ver. Completa. A ver. ¿Se escucha el micro? Ah, no, todavía no. I think people still can't hear me. Okay. I'll remain standing, therefore.
Bueno, buenos días.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Ecologistas in Action for inviting me in and taking part in, for inviting me to take part in this workshop, which is obviously essential, and we're looking at very important questions. I want to make some basic reflections, although my colleagues have already touched upon most of them. There's a photo here of LEZs, the traffic directorate gave this to us. If you've been able to buy a relatively new car, then you're able to come in to the zone. And if you haven't, then you haven't. Then you can't. If you're a local resident in a pretty poor district, we wouldn't be able to drive in to reach our own homes. And if we're somebody with reduced mobility, we've got an old car, we also wouldn't be able to. These are key issues. Everything depends on the town planning and the governance of the overall town and the different sets of laws and regulations which are established. We need to ensure that the right types of regulations are taken on board to ensure that we regulate the different types of access in the right way, and we ensure that there is fairness and that we are dealing with our most vulnerable groups in the best way possible. That things shouldn't just be based on whether or not people have got enough money to purchase new technology vehicles. I wanted to focus on this a little bit, local solution versus global solution. It would seem that electric cars, low LEZs, local solution. Air quality would be likely to improve a lot if we all have electric cars. But climate change is a global issue, it's not just a local issue. Jose Alfonso was touching upon certain of the key issues. We need to look at an overall holistic solution and ensure that we are linked up with all the relevant stakeholders and all the relevant areas for action. Maria also mentioned the problems the very real problems that the pandemic introduced. And also we can say that in Logroño, the level of pollution went down when people stopped using vehicles due to the lockdown measures. In terms of restrictions vis-a-vis the labeling or otherwise of cars, we can see a diagram here. If we have an LEZ in the center of a city, that may be one thing, but if the city really is quite spread out and has different mini centers or neighborhood centers, we must also take this on board. And we must look at the possibilities people have for moving around on foot or by bike in real terms. Here, Logroño open streets. I can't go into too much detail, but going above and beyond this idea of the super blocks, that would mean looking at 3 blocks by 3 of a city center, in which you you modal filters and you make traffic guidelines in such a way that you ensure that there's a restriction, but also mobility of the right type for local residents, and you have the logistics and waste collection measures correctly applied. That you're not just focusing on whether there's labeling of cars and whether one type or another type of car is allowed to come in, but the whole welter of issues. If we go above and beyond this and look at other strategic proposals, the so-called pacified areas here on our map, which are the yellow, beige-colored areas, and the advances that have taken place really since people began considering things in around 2013. You can see that there's quite a large area of the city, which even we could say most of it, which is now LEZ. We have a healthy cycling route there. We can see in the reddish color. Just to give an example, and you can see this in Google Maps. All the beigeish color areas are the pedestrianized areas, and this street, which I'm pointing to now, where you can see there's a modal filter. The cars have to turn back to the right. They can't cross over from south to north within this neighborhood. There's a one-way system in there, and we take into account everything in terms of the public buildings that may be their schools or the public libraries we can see on this photograph. And you can see the direction the cars which can come in have to use. They can't just go from north to south. Here you can see photos looking at this type of street with different types of parking spaces. Here we get certain streets which are where there is no access, and the one-way systems that are in place, and the spaces we've generated like this, which are for walking, for bikes, as you can see there, with pictures of kids cycling quite safely, or people at cafe terraces chatting or having a meeting or listening to music. This is what I was mentioning a bit earlier, and you can see here there's a school, the Madre de Dios school. So we really made that the center of what I was talking about earlier in terms of developing the very specific pedestrianized and one-way system. Here we can see the photos before and after, and the impact on the crossings of the streets, which become a lot more narrow, and you can see how we address the problem of accidents and people being knocked over by introducing these positive measures to restrict traffic. So the small number of cars which can come in have to be aware that they're coming into a different type of zone. And this is why we've got the right type of signing up, and people are indeed fully aware. This is another of our so-called pacified areas with another school in the center of it. This street, which was in fact running between the infant school and the junior and start of high school of an overall large school. You can see the pictures there. This is how we've allowed ourselves to be led in terms of the developments we've done. We've looked at where there have been large schools in the center of urban areas, and we've tried to develop projects with the school firmly at the center. And we've taken on board all the stakeholders from the schools, as well as, of course, the pupils themselves. making the crossings more narrower. We've risen the in height the actual crossings, taken very firm measures to act as barriers and to show any of the cars, the low number of cars which can come in, and the way they have to behave. And we've gotten rid of the problem of cars being double parked, for example, in front of schools in a pedestrianised area. And this used to happen. We've got the school with these intersections. And since we have a rise there, a bump in the road, which has been put in, the cars absolutely have to slow down. There's no way for that to be ignored. So here there's another idea of this super block concept, and here we've got the entry to a zone like this, where we've got the photo here of cars being badly parked on the left-hand side, and the right-hand side is the after photo. Again here, left and right, before and after. And again, there was work undertaken to ensure that obstacles were placed in the roads around these areas to ensure that cars had to slow down the number of cars which were able to come in. This street here was a link between the primary school and the high school that we can see at the end of the road there. You can see the difference there between the left and the right hand side photos. When you can see the LEZs outlined here, and we have our mobility strategy, that means a big change, but we want the whole of the city to be affected. We want to look at things in a holistic way, and we want to ensure this superblock concept is applied correctly throughout our city. In the European Mobility Week, we looked at things very specifically. If you look at red there, these are the things which channel traffic from south to north or east to west. Indeed, you can see the LEZ of the historic centre and the pedestrianised area where we've got our so-called 100 shops area. So we're applying this the same logic as we did in these our so-called pacified areas, looking towards and using indeed the outer ring roads of the city in order to for the purpose of going around the city as opposed to going right through the historic centre. Jose Alfonso touched upon a number of these questions earlier. Perhaps the filters, etc., were not enough, but so we've introduced camera surveillance here as well in some of our central streets to ensure that there's compliance with the measures in place, and we can thereby monitor what's going on at different times during the day and night. Model 3 here, we want to avoid this model in which there are tunnels going through the center of the city. 2 years ago, when we arrived at the council, this work was already being built, and there was going to be another one built, but we decided to stop the one that was being built and to transform this tunnel here in a crossroads, and therefore we won over 4,000 meters of public space for our citizens. And this is the type of measure which means that the city can reduce its level of pollution. If we had maintained this tunnel, then it would have been a lot more difficult to achieve reductions in pollution. In looking at reducing congestion as well, there are other measures. We created a cycle pathway going through the city, and we looked at redistribution of public space using sustainable transport, as I said, bikes, for example. And we managed to reduce, therefore, parking, double parking, and stopping this idea that cars necessarily have to take you door to door. And meaning that we get the message across that people have to reduce speed and that speed is not king. You can see certain of our central streets here. On the right-hand side, the change that's been achieved. There's been a redistribution, and you can see there's a shared lane for different modes of transport, and then there's an exclusive bike lane and provisional widening of pavements, and ensuring that we're able to generate the right type of changes to achieve the changes that are required for the climate change measures. You can see there's the image here prior to what was done, and look at the change at the bottom. And again, this raised part of the road that was created in order to reduce speed, and the bumpers that were put in place there as well, and the measures taken to improve the routes available to cyclists, all of which improved everything around the school and its whole environment. And also a shared lane so that we could encourage car users and bike users to coexist.
This is another picture of the same street, more double parked cars and a reduction in public space, but now there's a parking lot. Double parking is not allowed unless perhaps some lorries have to unload parcels. Then buses. There are 2 lanes down this road, which is one of the main ones in the city. And this was a swift, tactical approach to make the city safer, pedestrian crossings safer as well. We have created a sort of zigzag route so as to ensure that cars comply with the existing speed limits. And that's something we've been doing throughout the whole city, really. There are more pedestrian crossings now. We've created 50 new ones, actually. And by doing that, we have prioritized pedestrians. This, in turn, leads to a speed reduction. Cars now know that they're no longer the owners of our streets. We've also created and improved access to schools and office buildings. In this particular case, you can see a school before and after we intervened. We created a bike park just by the school door to give a better visibility. And the platform has really been yielding great results because cars truly drive slowly in the vicinity of our schools. This is also before and after comparison. We added a further pedestrian crossing, and we created a pedestrian platform for students to benefit from. So whenever you do a campaign like this one, by analyzing school routes, the result is that you truly make mobility in and around schools a lot more sustainable. This is yet another example of what we did. We pedestrianized this little alleyway. This little alleyway used to be very much dominated by vehicles, a lot of traffic jams. We pedestrianized it, and now it's all a lot better for locals living there, for the school that's in the vicinity. We've truly converted this area into something that citizens can truly benefit from. I think I've gone a little over time, but if you have any more questions about Pontevedra, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Yes, it certainly seems like there are a number of very brave administrations out there, and I'm very happy to see that. I'd like to give the floor to Annabel Goulias from Pontevedra. Pontevedra has been very brave in the past few years. They've taken a few very important steps in the past few years. Pontevedra has become a true low emission zones. It's still ineligible to receive subsidies for low emitting cities because they don't emit at all. So over to you, Annabel. Thank you very much. Good afternoon from Pontevedra. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'd like to thank our viewers, our participants, as well as the organizers. Unfortunately, the mayor was unable to join us today, but he had an interview to record, so couldn't be here. Anyway, we're here today to talk about the process of change that we have undergone in our city. I'll be giving an overview of our process at Pontevedra in the past few years. This is merely our humble interpretation of how things went down. I'll give you a breakdown of the main characteristics of our experience, things that worked out in our city, I should point out. I believe you can see my presentation, so let's begin. This moment presents a number of opportunities, as other speakers have also said. Finally, we do have a nationwide agenda that's promoting debate. We often talk about liquid cities because changes happen so quickly. We often spend too much time planning. Now, don't misunderstand me. Planning is absolutely necessary, but I believe we spend a lot of time planning, too much of it perhaps, and little time acting. We shouldn't forget that regardless of size, small, large cities, these are the places we live in. and it's necessary to take proper care of the environment, to protect it, but also to reflect upon the air we breathe every day. So we should all reflect on the importance of clean air in our cities. And to that end, we need to make important decisions regarding our urban environment. From our point of view, this vision requires clear-cut goals and a clear-cut political agenda. One that is completely independent of political parties. We need a shared vision in our policies. I'm very proud personally to be part of a political organization, but in politics there are several different players that each promote different ways of thinking about practical issues within our cities. But we need a shared vision. We need one sole unified project, one common idea of what we want to achieve. And once we have that, decisions need to be made. In this process, we had three guiding lights, so to speak. The first one was the people who live in our cities. As you can see in our cities, as you can see in these pictures, our city was previously dominated by cars, and this was the space that we devoted to people. Second guiding light, how important is public space within a city? Public space to us is a right that's inherent to people who live in a city. A right that's just as important as all the others. So what do we want our public space to look like within our cities? This is something we should bear in mind when it comes to making decisions. And that's what we did in Pontevedra. People often talk about private vehicles and a lot of important issues, but it's also very important to talk about public space. And finally, who should be responsible for the urban restructuring of our cities? According to the Spanish legal framework, one of the unquestionable principles is that it should be citizens. Citizens should have the prerogative to design their own cities. And we believe that political representatives that don't go by, that don't respect the will of their citizens, they're failing them. And that's what we kept in mind when it came to redesigning our city. And we redesigned our city, mind you, along with citizens associations, with citizens themselves. This is a meeting we called back in 2016 where we talked to people and showed them our project, because to us, participation is fundamental. Now, mind you, it's impossible to achieve full consensus at any given time. But the fact that we don't have full consensus doesn't mean that we can't make decisions. As a matter of fact, it can't be an obstacle. It shouldn't really. Often, we don't make decisions because in this lack of full consensus, we find the perfect pretext not to launch an initiative we really believe in. We're public representatives, and every 4 years, we are bound to listen to what our citizens have to say. But that doesn't mean we're exempt from having to make decisions, bold decisions sometimes. We went to this neighborhood in particular to talk to people because they were opposed to the measures we proposed. You need to act. In 1999, just to give you an idea, Pontevedra was a gray city. It was very unsafe, and it had very, very high volumes of traffic. Our population is highly dense, concentrated within the town center, and as a result, we had similar problems to larger cities. Again, we're a very compact
una alta densidad de población, tenemos 84.000 habitantes ahora mismo, pero en un área metropolitana de 250.000 habitantes. Y tenemos, como digo, una densidad de población muy alta. Imaginaros, pues tengo aquí el dato, en 1 kilómetro cuadrado tenemos 24.000 habitantes que generaban problemas de tráfico importantes. Nos inspiramos en todas las fuentes porque está casi todo escrito, ¿no? Desde Jane Jacobs, Tonucci, Appleyard, Sally Cairns. Hay muchísimos teóricos que habían hablado de los problemas del tráfico. No nos limitamos a copiar acríticamente todo lo que se hacía, intentamos buscar nuestras propias soluciones, pero sin duda las referencias que estaban, ¿no? sobre la mesa, pues nos ayudaron también a construir a nuestra propia realidad. Y tenemos una lección muy aprendida, y es que cuando hablamos de mejorar la calidad de vida en las ciudades, cuando hablamos incluso de las zonas de bajas emisiones, esto no puede ser llevado a un debate
when it comes to low emission zones.
Si la solución, y permitidme la hipérbole, pasa por sustituir determinado tipo de coches por
the
When it
solution
comes to
here
low
is to go through
emission
different types
zones,
of
several
solution, whether we're
measures
talking
need to
about
be
different types of
adopted.
hybrids or
Labeled cars,
we'll
car
have,
labeling.
we'll still have traffic
But
problems, and
still,
we'll
as
still
long
be
as there are
occupying
cars in the town center, we will keep on having traffic
public
problems.
spaces,
And we will still be
we have to
launching
look at the whole
the
of the welter of
message
issues.
that pedestrians are less important
For example,
than cars.
when we were looking at putting in an extra lane for cars, and we had car lanes that were being overused because the message that people were receiving was that they needed to use their cars to go from one place to another. So the only way to reduce traffic is to get people to use cars less, obviously, not to send out the message that they need to be using them to go from A to B. There's no magic wand, but we need to take the right decisions in political terms, in terms of to really turn things on their head, so that in a city like Pontevedra, that we really give more dignity to walking and to allow people to find ways to move around, which can be done without use of the car, specifically by walking, obviously. And therefore, we want a people-first approach, regardless of people's exact status, and we need different ways of mobility, like cycling, and then lastly, private vehicles as the last option. Obviously, walking can be a big solution for us in a city of our size, but we need to obviously look closely at public transport issues as well. I was talking about this idea of getting rid of traffic altogether. You can see on the 1999, the exact old centre of the city, but there's a big change there when you look up to 2017. Look at the road network, where a lot of the old roads have gone for cars. Because what was happening in the past, as we could see, was that people were looking for shortcuts to get across. They weren't really looking to go into the center. They were just looking to go from north to south, for example. So there were improvements made there, and there are basically three types of traffic.
Y el tráfico de destino. Tráfico de paso. El tráfico que cruza la ciudad para atajar, pero no tiene ningún
But
problema.
we need to look at the different types, as I say. We need to generate different systems so that there are different loops. And if people want to take a shortcut, they shouldn't be using their car. There's also traffic which is just going around in circles looking for parking. And for example, I live in a neighborhood of the city, and what I thought was that I could take my car and have a parking space close to where I was working. But of course, the 64,000 people who live in the city were all thinking the same thing. So that you'd find that there were lots of people going around in circles trying to find a parking space. So what we were trying to do, it was to say to people that you won't find a parking space because there aren't none, there aren't any. So don't use your car. And when we were looking at different issues involved in getting rid of traffic, people were saying, well, the city will collapse, but the city didn't collapse. We can say that in Pontevedra, cars can be used to go anywhere, but only the cars that need to come into the city centre actually do. So you need a reason to come into the centre of Pontevedra, whether it's for deliveries, whether it's for collection of a parcel, whether you are doing it for care reasons or picking up an elderly family member.
Hasta la carga y descarga, etc, etc. Es decir, permitimos
So you
solamente
drop them off. And that's possible, but only when it's really necessary. We also found out that the cars necessary to the functioning of a city are fewer than initially thought. About parking, that's the big question. Our system is based on three types of parking. Paid parking in underground parking lots, then outdoors parking lots. The fee is actually quite low, about €1 per car. And the third option is outdoors parking in the town center, right next to the town hall, pretty much. Now, we also have parking space 5 minutes from the town center at the edge of the city. It's a little city. It's not suburban parking, so to speak. And that's completely free. So if you remember, I was telling you that anyone can enter Pontevedra driving their cars, but no longer than 15 minutes. Nobody can park in Pontevedra for 2 hours in the town center, but they can park anywhere they want at the edge of it for as long as they want, and that's free. You can only be in the town center, however, for no longer than 15 minutes. Do you have something to do very, very quickly? You can do that. So right now in Pontevedra, you will see people as well as bicycles, as well as public transport, as well as privately owned vehicles. What do we need to do yet? We need to mold our cities after our people. Accessibility need to be integrated into city design. And when I talk about integration, of course, I'm making a reference to all sorts of people, the visually impaired, for example, those with hearing impairments as well. City needs to be a global concept. The concept of city needs to be global, and this is a clear right for all people. The representative from Logroño said, and I fully agree, that it's necessary when it comes to safe public spaces to discourage drivers from speeding, and we've achieved that by introducing over 700 speed bumps throughout the city. They have two effects. On the one hand, these speed bumps physically prevent motorists from speeding, and on the other hand, by introducing these speed bumps, we've created a scenario where people are the great protagonists of our cities. It's not pedestrians that invade the dominion of cars. It's cars that need permission to access pedestrianized areas. We've also put a speed limit of 30 kilometers an hour at the edges of the city and 20 or 10 kilometers an hour within city limits. This goes hand in hand, of course, with the installation of, once again, over 700 speed bumps. I think it's important to talk about feminism in public spaces. Public spaces need to be safe. So when it comes to redesigning our cities, we need to remove all visual obstacles, hindrances. When women walk home, they need to be safe. Now, there would be a whole symbolic issue, if you will, to tackle here. A number of things should be addressed. We could rename our streets after important women. For example, we could redesign our mobility as a function of the current reflection that has been made on gender issues, but that's a much broader topic. Anyway, we also need a city that is modeled after children. If a city is apt for children, it's apt for anyone. Cities need to become a natural space where little children can feel free. And that's not something to do in the future. It's something we need to do right now. So let's go back through a few important concepts. Step number one, achieving a cultural change within our cities. We have done that in Pontevedra. If you ask anyone in Pontevedra about the best way to get from A to B, they will tell you on foot. Two, we need to reclaim public space for pedestrians. We organize about 1,000 cultural activities in public spaces every year. Concerts, exhibitions, cultural activities, all sorts of activities that are promoted by either the town hall, the administration, or citizens. Traffic reduction. We have reduced traffic by 77% in the center of Pontevedra. We have reduced traffic, sorry, by 90%, 77%. Just outside of the center, and by about 50% in suburban areas. How many cars are necessary for a city to keep on functioning? In 1999, we had 80,000 cars driving through our town center. In 2015, only 7,000. The city keeps on working. Local businesses are still flourishing. And as a matter of fact, it is now much faster to drive around town. It makes sense because thanks to all the roundabouts and speed bumps we've created, we've discouraged car use, which means when you do drive, you're free to do so without getting stuck in traffic jams. Since 2011, there have been 0 deaths due to car accidents. There haven't been deaths due to car crashes within the city limits, and that in and of itself makes it worth it. Reduction in emissions, 77%, 67% reduction in CO2 emissions. We're striving to comply with the parameters recommended by the WHO. Logroño was saying this earlier, if I'm not mistaken. Apart from air quality, it's important to take heed of other parameters as well. Noise pollution, for example, the PO2 effect is precisely this, creating closed cities, safe spaces within cities in order to contribute to the struggle against climate change. Basic demographic increase. Our population has increased by 33%, and we're the youngest city in Galicia. And in a context of an aging population, let me tell you, we are particularly proud of this achievement. But yet another great result came thanks to our collective self-confidence. Let me elaborate on that. In 2015, we were already talking about clean cities, public space, and people thought we were weird, really. But after a bit, we started receiving widespread international acknowledgement, and never would we have thought that we'd ever receive so much appreciation, because we're a very, very tiny portion of the kingdom of Spain, and we're very proud to have been recognized as an innovative space. We've been in touch with Beijing, Mexican cities. We're now in Madrid, Valladolid, speaking about Pontevedra, and we're so proud. But even more important, the Pontevedra model was possible because we all collaborated in creating it. Our citizens believed in us. They have believed in us since 1999. I am sorry if perhaps I'm coming across as overly prideful, but we do have achieved a lot. When it comes to city promotion, I'm in charge of promotion within our city, and that's closely related to all the changes that have been wrong. Let me give you an example. A few years back, The Guardian published an article about Pontevedra, and this gave us a big push in terms of international acknowledgement. We wouldn't have had the budget to pay for our international positioning campaign without it. Then the Times also wrote an article about us, along with other prestigious institutions. And the truth is, we were able to truly bring some important changes in the city after that.
For us, it depends on the clear ideological principles which we have. We shouldn't be afraid of words or of actions, and we need to follow up all the words with actions. And the Valladolid representative said, it's the time now to take advantage of all the work that's taking place in a network so that we have clear approaches. It's up to us to continue to prioritize the right measures. And as our mayor always says, this is working for us. So we need to develop what has been achieved already. It would be good for me to leave these pictures of before and after. but the best thing is to see it live, and you will think that I'm doing promotion of the city here, of course, but the best thing is truly to come along and view it for yourself, and we'd be delighted to welcome you to our city. If you hear any car horns going off, they won't be Pontevedra cars, they'll be Vigo cars. It's a joke. But I think I'm coming to the end of my time, so I'll just say that it's been a pleasure to be speaking, and thank you very much for being able to speak to you today. Thank you, Annabelle. We've now got the presentation by Cesar Gallardo, who's the Head of Service of the Office for Ecological Transition of Seville City Council. Good afternoon, everyone. I don't know if I'm being heard correctly. Just move a bit further back from the mic, maybe. Better? Do you have a presentation? Yep. Okay. After listening to the presentations of our colleagues, I thought that we've got problems in common, and some of the ideas are common as well. I won't talk about points that have already been touched upon. I'll try to look at some different areas and give a different point of view as to what an LEZ might be. Well, that was a great presentation there from our colleague from Pontevedra, which has made things more difficult for me to come up to that level, but I will do my best. I'll now try to put up my presentation in slides. Okay, so I want to speak about a project which we're undertaking in the Cartuja area of Seville.
Y ahí no hemos propuesto una zona de bajas emisiones, sino una zona de cero emisiones.
We've proposed a zero emissions area for that area, that neighborhood. To give a bit of background and to tell you something about the geographical context, as you know, the island of La Cartuja received a real boost from 1992 in Seville. And then it ended up being a scientific and technological park, and now it's going to be the scene for this project. The Andalusian regional government is also involved in this project, the technological park itself, and also the company Endesa.
Que estamos trabajando en este proyecto. Pilar me pidió también que planteara también la otra gran zona de bajas emisiones de la ciudad. Voy a entrar muy poquito porque quiero centrarme en el otro proyecto.
I want to talk more about this zero emissions project, but there's another LEZ, which we're calling the breathing plan. As you can see here in the historic old centre of Seville and the Triana area of Seville on the map there. LEZs.
Nosotros hemos desarrollado una estrategia muy clara.
There's a clear strategy here up to 2030 vis-a-vis what we want to see Seville become, and along with the Sustainable Mobility Urban Plan, we want to have planning and a strategy which will move us towards a city which is able to overcome the challenges that Pontevedra has, yes, but also
a la ambición de
in
ser una
terms of the ambition to be a city for people, climatically a city which is responsible in climate terms.
zona de baja emisiones
In this sense, the LEZ in the historic center of the city has achieved important goals.
está en proyecto y en ejecución y que, bueno, que desgraciadamente bueno, pues duró poco porque coincidió con un cambio de gobierno.
There was a change in the local government, so that the advantages didn't run for as long as it was hoped.
Es lo que es el fin último de lo que debe ser una zona de exclusión del
But
tráfico.
this type of traffic exclusion area is what we were looking at and are looking at for the old part of the city centre. Obviously, where things have perhaps not begun in exactly the right way, we need to look towards turning things around and ensuring that the right result is achieved at the end of the day.
Respecto a los distintos sectores de la población y sus intereses.
And involve all our stakeholders and all citizens and take into account all the different activities, of course. Whether we refer to LEZs or whether we refer to zones in different terms, we're talking about the same set of problems. So, in terms of these two LEZs, there's a difference in size.
Soluciones distintas u objetivos distintos. Y por
So
tanto,
we're talking about being less or more ambitious depending on the different challenges to hand. So in the zero emissions zone or the low emission zone that we are looking to implement in Cartuja is very ambitious because we're looking to exclude ICE vehicles and make the island not a zero emissions zone and to also be consumption neutral in terms of its functioning overall. We've got 536 companies there who employ over 23,700 workers, 3 university premises, and so we have over 10,000 university students who attend classes there on a daily basis. This is obviously of great note. There are perhaps other educational centres which need to be taken into account as well, but here we're just referring to the university students. In terms of our diagnostic plan for Cartuja, we looked at the urban mobility plan, of course. We consulted the business owners based in the area.
Básicamente se basaba en el vehículo privado.
It was the private vehicles were seen to be very much the means of transport which we use. As we can see here, 55%. So this starting point if we take into account where we want to be, we'll need too drastic a challenge
dentro de lo que es la Cartuja.
in terms of applying the mobility plan for Cartuja. So if we look at Cartuja related to the other LEZs, well, we're looking at restricting access for fossil fuel combustion vehicles.
El objetivo que queremos conseguir. Lo segundo,
and elimination of parking on the roads.
muy claramente, o sea, nada de vehículo privado, básicamente, y nada de aparcamiento.
So ruling out both private vehicles and parking per se. So of course, where parking does exist, as we saw with the case in Pontevedra, there are vehicles, of course. So this means that it's more difficult to move towards the energy transition goals.
El tercer elemento,
The third element is to pedestrianize and regreen our streets and the streets that are in the middle of the island in particular.
Del sitio al que vamos.
And fourth point is to recovery of the boulevards which are there via reurbanization in a bioclimatic way, which will involve ensuring zero emissions, but also take into account elements of climate change that are affecting everyone in general in the world, obviously, such as the heat waves, and looking at other key elements as well. Implementations of 1,000 parking stations safe parking stations for bikes in this modal shift that we're looking to apply here. We've got 200 kilometers of bike lanes in Seville. And promoting the private bikes as being the main means of transport is very important for us. There's also a development of an intermodal mobility plan.
Con el vehículo privado no vengas hacia esta zona.
Sending out a clear message that please don't come to this zone with private vehicles.
Tienes que ofrecer una alternativa como luego veremos.
And thereby, of course, you need to offer alternative means of transport. So there need to be clear plans of transportation to get people to and from work.
No es una responsabilidad solo del gobierno de una ciudad, es una responsabilidad también de quien genera esa movilidad.
And take on board the roles and viewpoints of all the different stakeholders. We're not just talking about the responsibility of local government here. We need to look at responsibility for all of the stakeholders involved.
Es de regular la movilidad obligada. Y la movilidad obligada pues tiene unos condicionantes que
So essential travel, such as commuting to and from work, needs to be viewed in a holistic manner, and we need to ensure that we take into consideration the role of everyone, the companies and people themselves. Management of parking spaces and the infrastructure for for battery charging for the electric vehicles, ensure that people understand that it'll be hard or virtually impossible to park there, and send out thereby a clear message that they shouldn't come with private cars.
Bueno, decía que en las grandes ciudades, las áreas metropolitanas, pues condicionan las decisiones que se toman dentro de la ciudad, y efectivamente
We have to also look at certain of the comments and ideas that came about in terms of the role of metropolitan areas and their impact on big cities. So in our case, for example, a large percentage of decisions that we are bound to apply have come from the metropolitan area institution. So things are really bound up in the different competence levels. There's also the management of the share out of the last mile in terms of the achievement of what we're hoping for. Obviously, we're looking to reduce emissions and to improve air quality. That's clear. It's our leitmotif. But we also want to reorder many of the different factors that are involved in this in the city, many of the different stakeholders, and as in other big cities, we have to involve everyone in Seville and ensure that everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet. And lastly, then, point 10,
que hay soluciones de conducción autónoma, incluso de movilidad aérea.
We want to look at autonomous driving and mobility within the urban area, which do fit in with the objectives that we're looking for. So the three overarching elements that I referred to at the outset, and then these more detailed points, which I've listed here as 10. And overall, of course, this ensuring that we improve well-being for everyone who lives here, and also we improve the quality of public space for use by anybody. And in terms of pedestrians, we're not talking about changes to make people worse off, to necessarily change from combustion-based vehicles to electric ones, and that's it.
Es la invasión del espacio público.
We're looking at the issues in a full way, looking at this invasion of public space and how we can improve things in that sense. We don't want to necessarily achieve this point on the left. We should have maintained this this technological park like this, and this didn't happen, unfortunately. But
estamos intentando volver a aplicar técnicas que se aplicaron en el 92, pero sí
does seem amazing that we're looking back to applying some of the best results from 92 now in 2021, but we have to look at things that were done well in the past as well.
Un boulevard que es bastante duro.
And we have to look at certain of the large avenues, and we have to try to make sure that the project along the lines that we're developing it is implemented in exactly the right way, and that we work towards the right results for our climate change measures, which will ensure that we are working to combat climate change in the best way possible, and that we recover public spaces for people.
verdaderamente no deben ser para el coche.
And this is truly something that we need to do for our citizens.
A recuperar en la,
There are a number of examples I could give in this regard. But anyway, I was talking about intermodality earlier within mobility,
trae sus condicionantes. Actualmente,
which has its advantages, clearly. Currently,
que se ha previsto excluir del tráfico del vehículo de combustión, pues
we have
está ya dotada, ¿no? con
been working towards
lo que son
putting a ban on combustion engine vehicles
un servicio que se lleva prestando
within a certain area of the city. We already have 2 LEZs.
una novedad porque
Apart from that,
en el desarrollo de un piloto de ordenación
and we've launched a pilot initiative that's led to the creation of 3 skate rental stations, stations where you can go and rent out
con el resto del viario.
your skates to move
Eran dos líneas
around the city.
de autobuses, son dos líneas
We also have buses, of course. In Cartuja, we have 2 circle lines. We want to create a 3rd bus route that goes through the whole city, and that surely will greatly help us reduce traffic. We also have an underground, the metro. This is the intermodality I was talking about earlier. We also have an overground service that connects the city to Cartuja. Now, I talked about the underground line earlier. Unfortunately, we currently only have exactly 1 line, but it's something we will look at expanding in the future. We also have speed bumps, similar to those my colleague from Pontevedra talks about earlier. We have speed bumps on the island of Cartuja, and they are an interesting solution when intermodality is not an option. This is one of the skates I was talking about. We have this beautiful platform that can be used to rent them out at a very low cost. We also have a pilot project to provide Cartuja employees with free scooters like the one you saw in the picture. These are the 10 companies that have been taking part in this pilot project, and once again their employees can opt to use this alternative means of transport to go into work. Regarding corporate mobility plans, that's also a shared responsibility. Within the park, companies employ thousands of people who, of course, have a number of obligations to face. And that's why we thought it would be interesting to provide them with alternate transport solutions. Our goals here are, number 1, to reduce travel as a general rule and reduce its cost as well. Our alternatives are cheaper than private vehicles. If they weren't, it would be difficult to propose them as a viable alternative. Another thing we want to do is reduce travel time between Seville downtown, so to speak, and the Cartuja island. We also want to reduce our carbon footprint. That's also an important responsibility that we have, a responsibility that all the workers of La Cartuja have. And in order to do that, we want to encourage sustainable mobility solutions. Finally, all in all, if we want to achieve these goals, we need to enable companies to offer viable solutions to their employees, and that's why we launched this pilot project. Companies, I have to say, have helped us in coming up with our alternate mobility programs, and we have been able, I think, to come up with viable alternatives to private transport. In order to do that, we had to familiarize ourselves with the concerns of their employees, how long it takes them to get into work, how they get into work, what means of transport they use. We did just that. We've launched this pilot project, and we think it could give good results. Of course, in this plan, like we would have to do in any other plans, we need to do some follow-up work as well. Now I'm going to speed up a bit because I don't have a lot of time left. Regarding parking, in cities on a daily basis, whenever a new measure is adopted, well, it takes some time for it to really be accepted by the population, to sink in. Even if the measure you, as an administrator, proposed is more efficient than existing solutions. In the case of parking spaces, we are aware that we need to offer our citizens some sort of viable alternative. In La Cartuja, there are currently 15,600 parking spots altogether. That's not ideal, because with all those parking spaces, we encourage employees to use their private vehicles. So the blue arrow on the screen is pointing at the two parking areas within the Cartuja island and to a central square in the city where public transport is available from. That could be a solution, but it's something we have to keep on working on. Can you wrap up, please? Yes, of course. To conclude, I would like to encourage you to familiarize yourselves with the e-City Seville project. The goals that have been set for 2050 have been a guiding light for us, and I think this can be an interesting project for you all to look at. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Caesar. There will now be a Q&A session. A few people have requested the floor, both online and in the room. Yes, we have a question from Ariadna, the Logroño representative. They ask if you've worked with alongside families, parents, children, and also if you worked on the project of super blocks. I also have another question myself for the table. I seem to understand that traffic has reduced by 30% in Valladolid with the last few measures that were adopted. The same goes for Pontevedra, although possibly to a higher extent. I seem to remember 80%, in fact. I also wanted to ask you if in Logroño and Seville you already have data regarding traffic reduction in your cities over the past few years. And regarding Seville, I have a more specific question. An extensive network of bike lanes has been set up in Seville quite a few years ago. I wanted to ask you if that's had an impact on traffic reduction. Okay, so to answer your questions, yes, we did work alongside families in our schools. As a matter of fact, the requests we received came from the families directly. With the pandemic, we took the opportunity to expand a number of pavements across the city. As a matter of fact, families demonstrated, they launched a demonstration to call for these changes within the city. From the administration as well, we talked to them about bus routes. We talked to families precisely. That's fundamental. Regarding your second question, super blocks, like you called them, we started working towards that in the first part, during the first part of the pandemic. We started out with a simple proposal, because at first we sort of wanted to test the waters and see how it was going to be received by the population. And we're still in that phase, actually. In other cases, we've also had an opportunity to act more extensively. After all, whenever citizens participate in these processes, it's normal for these initiatives to take some time before being taken to full fruition. Finally, about data, I don't think we have any conclusive data right now, because this is still a work in progress situation. The pandemic led to a significant reduction in traffic, of course, which was great, but it was a bit of an unusual situation. Maria, yes, I'll be very quick. In January this year, 2021, thanks to the measures we adopted, it has been estimated that 9,000 cars now enter our city from the west entrance. That's half as many as we used to have. Regarding pollution, I talked in my presentation about the effects of the pandemic and lockdowns, but in August 2021, compared to 2019 levels, there has been a significant improvement. Pontevedra, do you have any figures for us? The reduction in traffic was 97% in the town center. After a month since we took office, 87% in the immediate vicinity of the town center and 57% globally within our town hall. All of these data are available on our webpage. Clicking on the PO2 Observatory tab. The PO2 Observatory is a department we created to monitor the environmental situation within our city. So, Seville, can you answer the question about bike lanes in Seville? Right, so about traffic reduction, I don't have any figures now, especially relating to bicycle use. Hopefully I'll be able to give you these figures later on, but I can tell you that bike use had went through phases. We had a peak in 2011 when we first created the LEZ. At that point, there was a boom in bicycle use. We actually went up a few positions in the world ranking. Then in 2019, there was another peak after a slight decrease in bike use in the years following 2011. We're getting close to 2011 levels. We were, at least as of 2019. Right now, we don't have any figures because the pandemic has had a huge impact on mobility. So in 2011, we had about 72,000 active bike users, and before the pandemic, we had about 70,000. Thank you, Cesar. Any more requests for the floor? García Vicente. Yes. Hello, I'm from Madrid. In this panel, you talked about your projects. They're all beautiful. Congrats. But I also want to say that there are a number of civil servants, public servants that end up becoming public enemies. In Madrid, for example, people have actively worked against all the measures that had been proposed in terms of sustainable mobility in the past few years. And we did really take a hit there. 200,000 euros were spent towards lifting the LEZ from central Madrid after we'd done so much to comply with EU regulations and climate change goals. That's truly disgraceful. But I also have a question for you. I think everything we do should transcend the individual needs of our cities. What's at stake here is the very survival of humanity, our health. It's something we can achieve if we work together. I wanted to thank the organizers of this event for everything they did. That's all from me. Thank you.
Does anyone want to answer? Well, I'm in agreement with what's already been said. Pilar, in terms of the model that we're talking about, pushing things forward very fast, because obviously people have been talking about climate change since the 1960s. And there's been a fear in terms of acting, because if people thought that, well, if I get rid of cars, I'm going to lose votes, in terms of we're thinking of politicians. So it's taken a long time, but it's true that it's very unfortunate that people are trying to get credit for their parties out of certain of the actions all parties say that they're in agreement with the main thrust of what we've been talking about, but when it comes down to it, and people think that they can get hold of a few more votes by saying one thing or another, or pandering to one group or another, by criticizing levels of participation or making up other issues, as opposed to everyone working in the same direction and trying to get across the message because everyone is in broad agreement. When we were talking about public ownership of water and how this is management and certain of the elements as well in Pontevedra in 2015, I think there were certain people, if we look at the different municipal governments, for example, in Madrid, Madrid, for example, Inés Sabanés, and Madrid Central, and now things are just being reversed now. So these are really things which are against common sense and which are against health. In terms of the climate change law in Spain, well, it really does create a legal provision for the LEZs, and this is a good thing, but it would be additionally good if also local laws would ring fence certain of the progress which has been made in the sense in which we're all talking here today. Obviously, the different realities are there for everyone to see if we look at different cities, but there are certain points in common as we've all been saying today, and we do need to go along hand in hand with the different social organizations, even though there will be criticism, because we need to ensure that everyone is moving along in the same direction and that we're really operating in terms of common sense. Cesar. Also, everyone else here is a politician, and I'm a civil servant. This is what Cesar said to me. Do you want to say anything in there? Well, when there have been attacks, to call them something in terms of private vehicles, there has been a lot of noise created, and you have to be aware of this, but sometimes you have to work hard and take a long time to be able to apply certain positive measures and get the message across in the right way. And also there needs to be time sometimes for people to be able to perceive the benefits of applying certain of the measures which we've been talking about. In these terms, then, in the past, where things were perhaps discussed a lot more heatedly in Seville, they've now become areas where there is broad general agreement, and that's what happens sometimes when a certain amount of time goes by. You can people can see clearly the benefits of measures applied. And that means also that in many cases there have been different municipal laws that have been put in place to back up the measures. Your interpreter speaking, we can't hear the speaker. Hello. Thank you very much for all the talks. They've all been very, very interesting, and I've learned a lot from everything I've been listening to. I have a number of comments and also a question which isn't related to this issue, but then it does. I'll explain myself. Can you just say who you are, please? Joaquin Robledo, and I'm a Valladolid citizen. I'm been involved in certain groups in this type of area in my city. I've been a bike rider only for 35 years, and I haven't got a driving license.
y lo comento lo primero porque es más anecdótico, una de las fotos con las que se presumía desde Pontevedra era una zagala en bicicleta en una calle peatonal. En Valladolid eso supondría multa por parte de la policía municipal.
One of the photos that they were vaunting and talking positively about from Pontevedra would actually lead to a fine in Valladolid. There are serious differences when we look at the different measures that have been applied. I've been surprised. There's a big river in each of the plans, and that is important in the city and also in terms of the local governments involved. You may think it's anecdotal, but the fact that there's a river does influence things and has a real impact when we're looking at town planning. If you look at other cities which don't have that situation of a big river and they just expand madly, as it were. So I've been living in La Victoria neighborhood of Valladolid for 30 years. And speaking of another one, which is called Huerta del Rey neighborhood as well. If we're looking at pleasanter and more livable cities, in Huerta del Rey, we got a victory in a more spontaneous fashion. But it depends who you speak to get a verdict on the situation. We need anthropological analyses of these situations. We've talked about schools, we've talked about universities, hospitals, but we haven't talked about parks. Or other meeting places like bars or social centers. So these are key as well when we're looking at a holistic approach to the issues we've been dealing with. We have to look at things in terms of community life. And when we look at this type of analysis, obviously, there are so many issues which may be positive, but in Huerta del Rey, where things were implemented in a very designed way, but it's a kind of a dead neighborhood, as it were. La Victoria has a lot more life, and it's right next to it. It's just a lot more lively, and there's a lot more going on. And all the guys and people from Huerta del Rey come to Victoria to have a drink, etc. I agree with Joaquin's reflection. I'm from Huerta del Rey. I live in Huerta del Rey myself, and I don't have a driving license. But yes, you're right. In Valladolid, the railway was seen as a kind of wound. The river is a space that means that Valladolid is a very special place, and there are bike lanes which are exclusive in certain of the areas which are particular, and people even had plans to use certain river paths for bikes instead of having bike lanes. So we have to be aware, there may be other uses that are not just bike riding alongside the river. In terms of the urban structure and also the type of people who live in the different neighborhoods, you have to take that into account as well. I agree with your analysis there. There's a lot more about Huerta del Rey and La Victoria. If you look at the different businesses like different bars, etc., it's a more complex debate. If we look at the service sector and how catering and restaurants is very important for cities like Valladolid. For me, that's not positive on a personal level, but it's a fact. Also, the prices of flats, for example, are more expensive in a neighborhood like Huerta del Rey. That means more people will also be looking to live in La Victoria because it's cheaper. So there's a lot more people who are migrants living there. You have to be aware that there's richer living places which maybe exclude people who have come as newcomers to the city because of the prices in places like Huerta del Rey. It's complex, and yes, I do go to La Victoria for a glass of wine. So let's end our round table today. Thank all the speakers for their great explanations and generosity. I think we'll now move on to our lunch. Thank you to everyone. Thank you.